Hello everybody and welcome back to A-Level Sociology. What we're going to do in this lesson is introduce our first of the substantive topics of A-Level Sociology by looking at the role of education, and specifically look at what the role of education is within society based from a functionalist perspective, so through the lens of functionalism, which, if you don't remember, was our first study, or our first sociological theory. And then we're going to go on to look at how Marxism understands the role of education in society, and then feminism, new right theories, postmodernism, interactionism, etc., etc. And so let's introduce what we mean by functionalism again. Just as a very brief introduction, we know that functionalism is a structuralist theory. It looks at the individual structures, the institutions within society, and argues that from a top-down perspective, the institutions within society shape societal norms and values. It is also one that involves and looks mainly at the function of these structures within societies, the functions and roles of these structures in society. And when we're talking about education, there are different ways in which we can examine it. So if we look at the basic understanding, what generally most functionalists would argue about education, they would mostly argue that education has a role of what we describe as secondary socialization. Okay, secondary socialization. We talked about socialization in the first lesson, but what do we mean by secondary socialization? Well, this is just generally because education has the role of passing on core values in society, core social or societal values. So we have this view where you go and get educated, and in the process of education, so part of the process of education, okay, this isn't entirely in and of itself what education does in a vacuum, but part of the process of education is to perform this role of passing on core social values. But education also has an allocation function as well, because according to functionalism, education sorts people into appropriate jobs and appropriate places of work, so appropriate workplaces. So when you go into education, the education system, depending on the work that you do, and depending on how good at the work that you do and what you would specialize in, allocates you into the appropriate career path or appropriate job or trade that you ought to be in, the thing that you are best at doing. And functionalism suggests that education provides training for skills needed in the workplace and the broader economy. So education is actually useful in its the function of education is useful in providing training. So providing training. That's what one of the functions of education is. And looking more deeply, we can look at some individual functionalist perspectives to have a look at what these people think individually. So Durkheim, for example, argues that education passes on the norms and values that are useful to integrate into society. So Durkheim is arguing here that just like in the first part of this lesson, that the norms and values that help people integrate in society and help people operate and function within society, so help people to operate within society, some of these norms and values are passed on and taught through education, through the education system. So again, we're implying that education doesn't just teach us things for a job in the future. So we're not just teaching maths, for example, to go on and become engineers, or we're not just teaching biology to go on and become doctors. What we're doing in education is, alongside teaching these educational values, so things like maths and science, for example, education is also passing on social norms and social values that help us integrate into education. And we will talk about this in the next lesson when we talk about Marxist perspectives of education, because Marxist perspectives of education highlight something known as the hidden curriculum. So the hidden curriculum. And the idea behind this is that alongside teaching your maths, your English, and your sciences, education also teaches different societal values. So things like, according to a Marxist, in the Marxist perspective, things like the ways in which the education system, the school system is the time values, for example. So things like how we have integrated blocks, we have lunch breaks, we have a start and an end, and apparently this socializes people into becoming more familiar with the general day-to-day life of the workplace, for example. And that's the kind of social values and norms and the kind of secondary socialization that exists within education. And it is something that's taken a little bit from functionalism, but also from Marxist perspectives as well. However, Marxist perspectives were looking at this from a more critical role, a critical view. Education also performs a role of creating a social order. This builds upon what we were talking about here when we're talking about the passing of social norms and social values. And this order is based on consensus and social cohesion. And as such, education performs a role of strengthening social solidarity. So of strengthening social solidarity. Don't forget, we're talking about consensus structuralism when we are examining functionalism. So we have society strengthening by using consensus. So using consensus basis. Alongside Durkheim, we also have Parsons, who, also a functionalist, argues that the school and education system acts as a connection, as a bridge between the family and adult roles in society. So acts as a bridge. There we go, there's an image there. So and as such, Parsons advances the concept of allocation within education. So whereas Durkheim was talking and emphasizing more the concept of social norms and values in education, Parsons spent a little bit of time emphasizing the way in which education allocates people into workplace roles. So it suggests that education selects and sorts people into their appropriate role, because education and the allocation of individuals in these social roles is fundamentally based on meritocratic systems, on meritocracy. And since education passes on values of achievement, you're expected to if you work hard within education, you're expected to achieve well, and therefore have a higher status within the workplace, or perceived status at least within the workplace, broader in society. And this does bring into an interesting question about meritocracy. So meritocracy is something that we're going to talk about a lot when we're talking about functionalism and when we talk about other sociological theories, and it's important to get an understanding of what meritocracy means right now, especially within the context of education. So according to a functionalist sociology, so according to functionalism, education is fundamentally meritocratic. So, and all we mean by meritocracy is a system whereby social rewards are allocated based off talent and effort and work. So, based off talent and effort and work, or if we were to be more, more pedantic, based off merit, just like a meritocracy. And this contrasts with education rewarding those because of their position within society. So, for example, an example of an unmeritocratic education system would be one where good grades are awarded based on your class structure, or maybe along racial lines, or along gender and sexual lines. So things like men versus women. And so, unlike these kinds of systems, where people in upper classes, for example, will get the better rewards, whereas people in lower classes do not, or even vice versa, in these kinds of systems, we would say that there is no meritocracy. And it is important when I said or vice versa, because if we were to allocate the top grades to people who are from lower working class backgrounds rather than from middle and upper class backgrounds, that would still not be meritocratic, even though the conventional wisdom tends to flip that on its head. And so it means that talent, hard work, and equal opportunity yields the greatest rewards in education. And equal opportunity refers and links to the concept of equality of opportunity. equality of opportunity, and how this contrasts with equality of outcome. So under a system where we have equality of opportunity, we understand this to mean that every single person has an equal opportunity to do what they want in life, or in education within this context. And so what we mean by this is, regardless of how the end goal is, so how regardless of what happens in the end, where we have people maybe who are earning more, earning less, who have achieved more, who have achieved less, as long as everybody had equal opportunity, then this doesn't matter. Compared to equality of outcome, where the end result is important, where the idea of equality of outcome is to achieve a system whereby everybody at the end point, okay, of this, whatever system of this, maybe once you finish education, everybody has equality within that system. And most people would argue that equality of opportunity is a more equitable method than equality of outcome. It suggests that if you want to work hard, okay, you can work hard and achieve whatever you want to achieve. Okay, if you don't want to work hard, you don't have to work hard and achieve what you want to achieve, and you won't do as well in education, for example. But regardless of whether or not you do well or not, you have the opportunity to do the best and become the best that you can be. And that's what the concept of equality of opportunity is. In the next lesson, what we're going to do is talk about how the role of education is viewed through the lens of Marxist perspectives and also neo-Marxist perspectives.